Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to MLK Uncut. I am Shantae Charles, and I have been bringing for the past, wow, I believe we are on day 31 in total, but we have been bringing you MLK's books, MLK's writings. And this particular series, we are on day 19 of his book, Where Do We Go From Here? We're also broadcasting live as we speak, also on YouTube Live at the channel Church Love 333. Again, that's Church Love 333 is the YouTube channel. We have been talking about all sorts of issues that MLK wrote about in his last book, and it's very important, very powerful. I believe this should be required reading for every Black American, especially, but also it should be really required reading in your local high school. MLK covers everything from civil rights movement to Black Power to what does the civil rights movement represent, to what does nonviolence represent, to different kinds of injustices that he wanted to see in his lifetime the United States deal with and tackle. So we are on day 19, and this week we have actually started out with talking about sources of power. And so we started out by talking about the government's default on their promises to Black America. And then we moved into what MLK called the sources of power. And so two of those sources we began to talk about were ideological and economic power. And then yesterday we moved into political power and voice. And today he kind of continues on a little bit about political power, but he really starts to focus on what does it mean to become a political activist, and what is the real CIA, right? What does MLK consider is a huge need for Black America? So that is where we are starting today. And I don't believe today's reading is going to be long. Nope, not at all. And so hopefully we're going to, in this section, hear a little bit, but I may also discuss a couple of things about our current political environment. So let me go ahead and on Facebook Live, let me go ahead and invite some people to join us. And I hope that you will do the same. I would like to thank those who have been watching, who have been sharing the videos, who have been inviting others to watch. And I just appreciate you doing that. I know this is not a subject matter that many people are interested in, although it is actually right along with the current conversation of the day. But I hope that many more people will get involved in this conversation, as well as check out what Martin Luther King actually said, because I think that's very important to where we are going in the future. So many people right now are missing his voice. I know I have seen on several different platforms people saying, I wonder if MLK was alive, I wonder what he would think about this. I wonder what he would think about the pledging to the allegiance and the national anthem issue. I wonder what he would think about police brutality. Well, you don't have to wonder. The reality is he wrote it down, and that is the power really of writing. That is the power of putting your thoughts and taking your thoughts and putting them into writing for the next generation, so that even after you are gone on, the next generation can look back and they can read and they can get an idea of what your heart was on a certain subject matter. So That's just a prophetic plug right there. That if God is set a word in your heart, I would encourage you to be obedient with that word, to hold that word in a way that God desires you to hold it, to package it, to cherish it, to um, put it down into writing, to publish it, right? To secure that word that God is putting you, or that message that God is putting you, to secure it for the future. So if you are on this broadcast, or you happen to come by this broadcast, and you know that God has set a word in your heart for this generation and for the generations to come, I encourage you to do that, to not delay. If it's your story, don't delay, because this right here is invaluable in terms of understanding where we are, where we've come from, where we're going, and what are age-old issues that have not gone away because America hasn't addressed them. And so people want the younger generation per se to be quiet, but the reality is the younger generation is only echoing the incompleteness of the former generation. The younger generation, right, is echoing the sentiments of their ancestors that never got redress, that never got justice. So we can't tell this generation to be quiet. They have a different assignment. They have a different way of communicating what they see as injustice. They have different tools. The previous generation probably would have broken the internet with their passion and with their fervor for what they were protesting. Had they had Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube Live, Facebook Live, they probably would have broken the internet. So because this generation is communicating in the tools in which it has, we can't now get upset and say, well, they shouldn't be communicating. As one of his books says, you know, justice is never given to you by those who have enjoyed the fruit of oppression. I'll say that again. Justice is never given to you by those who have enjoyed the fruit of oppression and those who are comfortable with the conditions in which Black Americans live in today. If you are a believer, there's no way in the world you can tell me that you have a relationship with Christ of the Bible and you're okay with the conditions in which Americans in this country live in. It should make you restless or sleepless at some point. So when people tell me that things are pretty good or things are okay, that tells me that they are a little out of touch with the level of poverty that is in our country. Just because things are comfortable for you, you shouldn't be satisfied there. You shouldn't be satisfied knowing that there are communities, right, that don't have clean drinking water in the United States. And that's not all, quote unquote, the Democratic leadership's fault. So we can't just keep blaming it on one party or the other party. At some point, we got to say, this is a human rights issue beyond who's in leadership over a city. Because keeping the argument at whose fault it is deflects from the problem of how are we going to solve it? How are we going to fix it? What kind of funds are we going to interject into that community? Because it's not just Flint, Michigan. What kinds of funds are we going to interject into that community because we believe in the human rights of everybody? Even if they have elected officials that may not be doing their job, the reality is, should everybody suffer because of that one or that two or that department of elected officials that didn't do their job? So we're just going to say, as Americans, we're just going to say, oh well, let that part of the country die. I don't think that is the heart of the country that we say that we love so much, right? So let's look at day 19, becoming political activists. Heavenly Father, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart, God, be acceptable in your sight, Father, for you are my strength and my redeemer. Lord, as we go through the reading today, I pray, Father God, that you would show us our hearts, that you would convict us, that you would guide us, that you would lead us, that you would grant us your wisdom, your knowledge, your understanding, your discernment, and give us keys on how to be the change that we desire to see in the earth. Amen. So let's begin. The final reason for our dearth of political strength, particularly in the North, arises from the grip of an old tradition on many individual Negroes. They tend to hold themselves aloof from politics as a serious concern. They sense that they are manipulated, and their defense is a cynical disinterest. To safeguard themselves on this front from the exploitation that torments them in so many areas, they shut the door to political activity and retreat into the dark shadows of passivity. Their sense of futility is deep, and in terms of their bitter experiences, it is justified. They cannot perceive political action as a source of power. It will take patient and persistent effort to eradicate this mood. But the new consciousness of strength, developed in a decade of stirring agitation, can be utilized to channel constructive Negro activity into political life and eliminate the stagnation produced by an outdated and defensive paralysis. In the future, we must become intensive political activists. We must be guided in this direction because we need political strength more desperately than any other group in American society. Most of us are too poor to have adequate economic power, and many of us are too rejected by the culture to be part of any tradition of power. Necessity will draw us toward the power inherent in the creative uses of politics. Negroes nurture a persisting myth that the Jews of America attained social mobility and status solely because they had money. It is unwise to ignore the era for many reasons. In a negative sense, it encourages anti-Semitism and overestimates money as a value. In a positive sense, the full truth reveals a useful lesson. So MLK now is going to go into something that I think is very important for us to note, especially in the spiritual climate in which we are in. He's going to begin to talk a little bit about Jews and the Jews in America. And I think this is powerful, and I'll come back and explain why after I read this segment. Jews progressed because they possessed a tradition of education combined with social and political action. The Jewish family enthroned education and sacrificed to get it. The result was far more than abstract learning. Uniting social action with educational competence, Jews became enormously effective in political life. Those Jews who became lawyers, businessmen, writers, entertainers, union leaders, and medical men did not vanish into the pursuits of their trade exclusively. They lived an active life in political circles learning the techniques and arts of politics. And the reason why I want to emphasize this, that he says the Jews progressed because they possessed a tradition of education combined with social and political action, was because by the time that the Jews arrived in America, they had learned a very valuable lesson that I don't believe that African Americans truly understand. At this point, we don't. They had learned that if you don't control media and you don't control politics, you don't control the narrative of how you are perceived in this society. And when you don't control the narrative, I didn't say work for the narrative that's being controlled. If you don't control the narrative, then when people paint you a certain way, it is very hard to undo the perception that has been put out in the world about you worldwide. I'll say that all again, okay? By the time the Jews arrived in America, they had already learned a very painful lesson through things like the Holocaust, that if you do not control the media and the politics, then you cannot control the narrative of your people group. You cannot control the narrative that's being put out about you to the worldwide community, not just the United States, to the worldwide community. It was because Hitler controlled politics and the media that he was able to enact a campaign that by the time he was done with his campaign, the same people who knew the Jews, who lived around the Jews, who worked with the Jews, by the time that man was done using media to manipulate the society, those same people sat back and were silent while he slaughtered 12 million people. And he was able to do it because he controlled politics and the policies, and he controlled media and the imagery and the perceptions that was put out about the Jews. It started with imagery. It started with perception. Then it went into laws. Then it went into Jim Crow type laws, where Jews couldn't be, where Jews couldn't work. They codified their hate. And so the Jews who held those particular positions could no longer work in them by law. So they were relegated to certain positions, which of course affected their economy. Then they separated them, and that's where we get the term ghetto from. They separated them into these ghettos, and they walled them in, and they built walls, and they walled them in. And then not only did they label them, but they physically labeled them. That if you're going to go out in society, we've already set the environment for you to be hated, murdered, beat up, destroyed. But if you're going to go out into society, we want you to put on a yellow star so people can easily identify who to pick off. So by the time we get to people being, transported in the middle of the night by soldiers, taken out of their homes, the soldiers ransacking them, stealing any possessions that they had. Good Jew, bad Jew, so-so Jew, middle class Jew, poor Jew, wealthy Jew. By the time they get to that point, nobody in society is speaking up for them. Because to speak up on their behalf means that you too will be punished and you too will be subjected to the same kinds of measurements that they were being subjected to. So when you, as a Black American, participate in a program, whether as an artist, an entertainer, a screenwriter, when you participate in things that set the Black community up to be targeted for genocide, you are no better than the person who formulates the plan. And we're going to talk about that on tomorrow. You too are a part of the problem. And as Dr. Boyce Watkins said, your oppressors can look like you. Your oppressors can have the same skin color as you. And some of us don't get it yet. That there are some who look like us that are riding really hard for Black genocide because they are disconnected from their people group. I'm gonna get off my soapbox now, and I'm gonna go back to reading. Those Jews who became lawyers, businessmen, writers, entertainers, union leaders, and medical men did not vanish into the pursuits of their trade exclusively. They lived an active life in political circles, learning the techniques and arts of politics. Nor was it only the rich who were involved in social and political action. Millions of Jews for half a century remained relatively poor, but they were far from passive in social and political areas. They lived in homes in which politics was a household word. They were deeply involved in radical parties, liberal parties, and conservative parties. They formed many of them. Very few Jews sank into despair and escapism, even when discrimination assailed the spirit and corroded initiative. Their life raft in the sea of discouragement was social action. Without overlooking the towering differences between the Negro and Jewish experiences, the lesson of Jewish mass involvement in social and political action and education is worthy of emulation. Negroes have already started on this road in creating the protest movement, but this is only a beginning. This was only a beginning. We must involve everyone we can reach, even those with inadequate education, and together acquire political sophistication by discussion, practice, and reading. Jews without education learned a great deal from political meetings, mass meetings, and trade union activities. Informal discussions and reading at home or in the streets are educational. They challenge the mind and inform our actions. Education without social action is a one-sided value because it has no true power potential. Social action without education is a weak expression of pure energy. Deeds uninformed by educated thought can take a false direction. Very, very powerful. That seems to be what's occurring right now. Deeds uninformed by educated thoughts can take false directions. That's why we need experienced leaders and leaders who have been where the young people are trying to go, rather than criticize all of their energy and their zeal, give them some educated thought so they cannot take a false direction. When we go into action and confront our adversaries, we must be as armed with knowledge as they. Our policies should have the strength of deep analysis beneath them to be able to challenge the clever sophistries of our opponents. The many thousands of Negroes who have already found intellectual growth and spiritual fulfillment on this path know its creative possibilities. They are not among the legions of the lost. They are not crushed by the weight of centuries. Most heartening among the young, the spirit of challenge and determination for change is becoming an unquenchable force. But the scope of struggle is still too narrow and too restricted. We must turn more of our energies and our focus and our creativity on the useful things that translate into power. This is not a program for a distant tomorrow when our children will somehow have acquired enough education to do it for themselves. We in this generation must do the work, and in doing it, stimulate our children to learn and acquire higher levels of skill and technique. It must become a crusade so vital that civil rights organizers do not repeatedly have to make personal calls to summons support. There must be a climate of social pressure in the Negro community that scorns the Negro who will not pick up his citizenship rights and add his strength enthusiastically and voluntarily to the accumulation of power for himself and his people. The past years have blown fresh winds through ghetto stagnation, but we are on the threshold of a significant change that demands a hundredfold acceleration. And if you look at where we are now and how much progress has been dialed back, we're actually at a place where we need 1,000-fold acceleration, because rights are being eroded. By 1970, 10 of our larger cities will have Negro majorities if present trends continue. We can shrug off this opportunity or use it for a new vitality to deepen and enrich our family and community life. How shall we turn the ghettos into a vast school, university? How shall we make every street corner a forum, not a lounging place for trivial gossip and petty gambling, where life is wasted and human experience withers to trivial sensations? How shall we make every houseworker and every laborer a demonstrator, a voter, a canvasser, and a student? The dignity their jobs may deny them is waiting for them in political and social action. So MLK said, listen, and one thing about, and I'll get to him in a second, but MLK said, listen, how can we turn the ghettos into a vast school? 500,000 people, it is estimated, will be in Atlanta this weekend. 500,000 people will be in Atlanta this weekend. 500,000 people will be in Atlanta this weekend. Not organizing for social and political action, but organizing for sexual pleasure and debauchery. 500,000 Black people are going to descend on Atlanta. What could happen with 500,000 Black people descending upon the Washington Capitol? Not for sexual debauchery, but to say, America, stop writing blank checks. Now, I'm not a big fan of rap music, but what I do know is that Tupac toward his closing days leading up to his death, right? Tupac was in the ghettos hosting block parties for free. And at the block parties, because I saw the video, I have seen video footage of this. At the block parties, he was talking about some of these very same issues. He would go in and he would say, I'm going to host this block party for free under the condition that nobody pulls out a gun and starts shooting folks. And at these block parties, he would begin to talk to them about the issues of the Black community. And then he would take up an offering for the community. He would have everybody start pulling out their money, and he would take up the money, and that money would go to that community. But that's not the Tupac you're going to hear on mass media. You got to dig for that. All right. So how shall we turn the ghettos into a vast school? If that's where everybody's at, that's where everybody's showing up, if that's where everybody's hanging out, how can we use that and leverage that to get the attention of our community in things that we need to be concerned about? All right, if you're still there, give me a thumbs up or some hearts, because I see my screen is freezing a little bit. So if you are still there and you're still able to hear, let's do that. We are actually coming up on the end of today's reading. Last section here. We must utilize the community action groups and training centers now proliferating in some slum areas to create not merely an electorate, but here's MLK's CIA that he said needed to be created with Black community. He said, we need to utilize what we have. We already got community action groups. We already have training centers in the slums. He said, we don't need to just create an electorate, but we need to create a CIA, a conscious, informed, and alert people. I'll say it again. A conscious, informed, and alert people who know their direction and whose collective wisdom and vitality will command respect. The slave heritage can be cast into the dim past by our consciousness of our strengths and our resolute determination to use them in our daily experiences. Power, I know this is going to be a very simple statement, but hopefully it will stick and it will shock those who will listen. MLK says, and I'm probably going to make a meme about this, power is not the white man's birthright. Let that marinate. I'm going to take a sip. Power is not the white man's birthright. Let me say it one more time. Power is not the white man's birthright. Unfortunately, we have people who think that, which is why they don't want to share power. They don't think anyone else has a right to power. But power belongs to God. And God is a distributor of power that brings about purpose and righteousness. So it will not be legislated for us and delivered in neat government packages. It is a social force any group can utilize by accumulating its elements in a planned, deliberate campaign to organize it under its own control. So, in closing, MLK wanted Black community, Black America, to understand that just because you see other groups with power, it doesn't mean that it was their birthright. They simply began to organize and harness it under their control. And when we get to the place where we understand that power is not conceded by the oppressor, it must be demanded. And the way you are able to demand it is by pooling together your resources, your human resources, your economic resources, your intellectual resources, and organizing yourselves so that you can harness the control of that power. We will definitely see greater change. This has been another installment of Chaos or Community. Where do we go from here? Tomorrow, I'm already going to tell you now. Tomorrow, we are going to be talking about, let's see. Yeah, tomorrow we're going to be talking about the weaknesses that MLK saw in Black America. And so we're going to talk in depth tomorrow about those weaknesses. We're also going to talk about white supremacist code in America. White supremacist code in America. We're going to talk about who's on code, because some people don't realize they're on code and they are on code. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what happens when you break white supremacist code. Even if you didn't realize you were a part of the code, they'll come and let you know. They will let you know that you have broken code. So that's going to be tomorrow. We'll cover that. And I do thank you all for viewing and for watching today's segment. I ask that you share this. I ask that you invite a friend to join us tomorrow, because it's going to get thick. And some people may come away from that teaching renouncing a couple of things, and I pray that they do. But these are things that we have to look at as a community if we are going to move forward. Well, thank you again for viewing. I love you with the love of the Lord. Take care, and God bless. Thank you again for viewing this episode, this day, and hope you will come back and join me for day 20. Take care, and God bless.